Ohio, a swing state no more. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. While the nation and Congress are divided right down the middle, Ohio clearly is on the red side of the color spectrum. The Republican wave that was supposed to sweep across the country never materialized, but it did hit Ohio. Republicans swept every statewide race, expanded their huge majorities in the state legislature, and they captured the biggest prize, the race for an open U.S. Senate seat. J.D. Vance had a clear victory over Democrat Tim Ryan, winning by more than 250,000 votes and 6 percentage points.
But now the people of Ohio have given us a job. And what we need to do over the next couple of years, over the next 6 years, for the full length of this Senate term, whoever's in the majority, whatever the president looks like, we have a very simple job to do. It's to go to work every single day and fight for the people of Ohio, fight for our workers.
When I called JD to concede, I told him, I said, you have got to take care of the working class people in this country, because the working class people have been forgotten.
Andy Chow, Tim Ryan tried really hard to get those working class voters to choose him over J.D. Vance. He made some inroads, but not enough.
Yeah, not enough. I mean, I guess if you do look at the overall picture of where the voters around Ohio fell, he did get a lot of the votes, or he was able to close the gap between him and his Republican opponent compared to the other statewide races. So it did seem like whatever strategy he was running was more effective than what the other Democrats running statewide were doing. But he just couldn't do enough, and he also didn't win those key counties in Mahoning Valley that seemed to be pivotal in being able to get him across the finish line and close that gap with J.D.
Desiree, did he overemphasize the white working class vote to the detriment of people who live in the cities, people of color?
I don't think Tim Ryan did that. I think what the Ryan campaign strategy was to reach people who have said over the last decade, Democrats forgot us. They haven't been here to visit us. They haven't talked to us. And what the Ryan campaign strategy was to narrow that gap, was to start talking to those people. But as we all know, Ohio is a both-and state. You have to talk to folks in suburban Ohio, and rural Ohio, and urban Ohio. And I saw Tim Ryan do that too.
Terry, was this a vote for J.D. Vance, or was this a vote against Tim Ryan and Joe Biden?
Well, I would argue it was the red tide was a part of it, and J.D. Vance had a special problem being a first-time candidate, particularly statewide. But I think the key thing, and Tim Ryan tried something creative, but this year trying to be on both sides of the polar divide, being Trump light, and then also taking care of and firing up your Democrat base, including the African-American community, was a challenge. And Sam Gresham on this show in the summer, early summer, pointed out that he had kind of forgotten the black community. And it's hard to do both at the same time without potentially turning off people on both sides.
And do you think that the Democrats were looking at this? Because Tim Ryan ran a good campaign. He was very competitive, really, right up until the end. They were saying this is the way Democrats can win. Well, they didn't win.
Well, it was a blueprint for Tim Ryan.
Yep.
I mean, I don't think every Democrat could do that, because he has a certain record that enabled him to do that. He is a moderate Democrat. He does, you know, I know you're shaking your head, but compared to a lot of Democrats, I see him in the moderate category. I mean, some people are calling, you know, the governor a moderate Republican now, so it's all kind of wishy-washy in a way. I think he ran the best campaign he could for him. I think maybe where he might have lost, and it'll be interesting to find out, is among independents who wanted someone more, quote-unquote, liberal, and wanted someone more pro-abortion rights, for instance, and along those lines.
He was also facing an uphill battle, it being the midterms after Joe Biden winning. And on top of all that, and I think something that was really fascinating on the night when JD accepted his victory, is that he thanked Governor Mike DeWine several times. And I think he clearly knew that he won this race partly because of the coattails of Mike DeWine, not because of Donald Trump, but because of how popular Mike DeWine is in this state.
But also, J.D. Vance received a lot of investment from Senator Mitch McConnell. And I would be remiss if I didn't say the National Democratic Party spent $0 for the race on behalf of Tim Ryan. They were not here. They were nowhere to be found. And so it was all on Tim, whereas J.D. Vance, a poor fundraising candidate, he wasn't a good campaigner. He was not in all 88 counties around the state, but he received a large buyout from the National Democratic Party and billionaires in Silicon Valley.
But Tim Ryan, it wasn't like he was without money. He raised nearly $50 million, almost twice what Sherrod Brown raised the last time he ran. So he had the money. Most of it came from national sources, a lot of small contributors. But Tim Ryan had the money. He obviously worked hard, but it wasn't the right timing for him.
There was a lot of ticket splitting. Vance had 380,000 fewer votes than DeWine. Ryan had about 390,000 more votes than Nan Whaley. So roughly 400,000 Ohioans voted for two different parties when it came to governor and U.S. Senate. So Tim Ryan, part of that worked, but he came up short.
I think he ran the best campaign he possibly could, and it's for the money. Yeah, he did raise a lot of money, but I agree with Desiree. The outside money from the National Democratic groups did not come in. That might have been of his own doing. He did not endear himself to the National Democrats. Part of his strategy was to distance himself from them, saying, I'm not going to be Nancy Pelosi's lapdog. Well, that's fine, but the lapdog gets the treats.
But I'll jump in and defend Chuck Schumer since he's not here. He looked at Ohio and realized this would be a tough state to win in, as big and diverse as it is, and expensive. So I'm going to defend Chuck Schumer and his decision. He was smart.
So that leads us for 2 years from now when Sherrod Brown is on the ballot. Desiree, how worried is he?
I don't think Senator Brown is worried at all because Ohio is Sherrod Brown country. And we are a big, diverse state. So I agree with you. We are a big, diverse state. And I don't know if Chuck Schumer would avoid Sherrod Brown in the halls and not pour money into Ohio. So I think Sherrod Brown certainly has work to do. I think all Democrats are thinking about what happened. But Sherrod Brown is not worried, and he's going to win.
All right, let's get to our next race. The governor's race, while historic, was not much of a race at all. Mike DeWine combined a base of goodwill he built during the early days of the COVID pandemic with the economic victories of Intel and Honda factories to glide to victory. DeWine defeated Nan Whaley by more than 1 million votes and 26 percentage points.
My friends, this is our time. It's Ohio's time. It's Ohio's time in history. Things are coming our way. This is a great manufacturing state. And again, the thing, though, you can talk about all the assets that we have, but the most important thing is the people.
There's a lot that's pretty broken about Ohio and our whole country. And there's a lot that's not. I stand before all of you and every little girl watching this at home as the first woman ever nominated for governor in the state of Ohio.
And Fisher, could any Democrat have beaten Mike DeWine this cycle?
I don't even know who that would be, I mean, at this point, because their bench is so thin as it is. But he's also, the most senior Republican candidate. He's been on every ballot, that there is practically, starting with state legislature, he was county prosecutor. He's worked his way up the food chain the old-fashioned way, and no, probably not. Could some have done better than others? Possibly, but I'm not sure who that would be.
Desiree, the state party, they didn't do a whole lot in this race, it didn't seem like, for Nan Whaley. Could the state party have done more?
I completely disagree. I think the state party did a lot. I saw Nan campaigning with Senator Brown the last several months, and they were very active with what we have. Again, investment matters, and the National Democrats have not reinvested in Ohio. And also the state party, look, we picked up a Democratic congressional seat, so we had a good night for congressional races. Now, we still have ways to go due to gerrymandering, but I think the state party did a lot. And obviously, we have a long way to go so that we can continue to turn our beloved state back blue.
Terry, is this a mandate for Governor DeWine? It's a big win. Does in his second term, does he stand up to the Republican legislature that he disagreed with so often in his first term and say, we're going to do it my way this time?
Well, the legislature is a whole different topic that we almost need a half hour to talk about. But I think to me, the most shocking thing on election night was Montgomery County, Dayton, her home county. She didn't just lose, she got beat 60-40 there, which tells you something very significant.
So that helps DeWine's mandate with the legislature.
Not necessarily, but as the governor would tell you, the last budget cycle, he got about 98% of what he wanted. And the good thing for the governor is the legislature has a lot of diversity. There's going to be a new House Speaker there. The Senate President's very savvy and smart. So they'll work it out. It'll take some time, but I don't think it'll be as brutal as some think.
Andy, the governor is a master at this. He keeps Donald Trump at arm's length, doesn't anger him, doesn't make him too happy, but Trump is really not a factor in Mike DeWine, except in the far, far right.
Well, and what's amazing is he almost went his entire first term and his entire reelection bid without having to go to a Trump rally until the very last day before Election Day, where he did share the stage with Trump and shook his hand.
Reluctantly.
Reluctantly. It was a very strange moment. I think another thing that we haven't talked about yet is that just the fact that DeWine refused to debate Nan Whaley really also hurt Nan's chances when it came to raising her own profile, and that kept her at arm's length as well.
As for the mandate issue, no. I mean, maybe people think that's what he has as a mandate because of that, but a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats, a lot of crossover voters supported DeWine in large part because of how he handled the COVID at the outset. And all of the power that he had back then to do that has been taken away by the Ohio General Assembly. And the Ohio General Assembly now has extended its supermajority. So there's only one body or two bodies in this state that have a mandate, and that's the Senate and the House.
Desiree, what is next for Nan Whaley, Desiree? Does she run again? She mentioned in her speech that she might now work to codify Roe versus Wade in the Ohio Constitution. Is that her next move?
Well, I haven't spoken to Mayor Whaley since after I was at the election night party, and I think everyone was just focused on what just happened and transpired. But I know, much like other fighters, you never give up on the fight, and she is going to certainly be on the front lines, organizing and mobilizing women and people across the state so that we can pass legislation and be the progressive state that Governor DeWine says we are and catch up to Kentucky.
Terry, one of the criticisms of Nan Whaley was that her campaign didn't really have a clear message. Should she have just stuck with, I'm the first woman from a major party running, and we need to protect abortion rights in Ohio?
Well, to her credit, she actually did have a message. It just varied from day to day because she started out with corruption, then it was guns, then it was abortion. She just didn't have a clear, concise message. And part of it is she had been co-opted on a lot of the issues by how well the governor was doing and how well he knows the state. A lot of people don't realize how hard he would work because he'd go to functions and he'd literally be the last person to leave because he was shaking the hand. So he's both a smart overall politician, but he's also good at doing retail politics.
And he's been in public office my entire life.
Mm-hmm. It's like Sherrod Brown.
Lieutenant Governor John Husted said no person has met more Ohioans than Mike DeWine, and we thought that's not just hyperbolic. Like, I think that might be true.
So what is next for Ohio Democrats? Desiree?
I think we continue to organize and mobilize our people. We're certainly reassessing the data and looking at what happened. Look, we know we have to turn out more young voters and voters in urban counties across the state. We have to have candidates that energize people, but more importantly, 2.4 million Ohioans have been purged from the voter rolls, right? And so we have to re-register people and make sure that they understand where their polling locations are. That changed this election cycle. There's only one ballot drop box per county. So we want to educate people about the process and getting engaged and participating and doing their civic duty by voting.
I'm going to disagree a little bit what you said earlier. Sherrod is incredibly worried because he's been around so long and the tide's moving against him. And when he last ran, he outspent unknown Renacci 28 million to 4 million, and he only won by about 6 points. He's worried, and that's going to be Sherrod's focus and the problem for the Democrat Party. How do you rebuild it when Sherrod wants it to be all about him?
All right, let's get to our next topic. Democrats had The hope of taking control of the Ohio Supreme Court, which could have influenced the never-ending fight over gerrymandering and possibly protect abortion rights, but Republicans captured all 3 seats. Sharon Kennedy moves from Justice to Chief Justice, defeating fellow Justice Jennifer Brunner, who stays on the court. The 2 incumbent Republicans named Pat won. Pat Fisher beat State Appeals Court Judge Terry Jamieson, and Pat DeWine beat Marilyn Zayas, also an appeals court judge. Desiree, with abortion and gerrymandering very much in the news, very much before the courts, the economy really doesn't affect the courts that much. You would think that the Democrats could have done better on those issues when electing judges. What happened here?
Well, one, the Republicans, which is smart on you all's behalf, they added party ID to Supreme Court candidates. We picked up a lot of judicial seats in the lower courts and Court of Appeals across the state, but the Supreme Court, we certainly did not do well with those party IDs, and that does hurt. So I'm not going to sit here and say that it doesn't, because I do worry about the future of our country as we think about what's coming before this conservative Supreme Court with a Republican supermajority in the state legislature, and just the Republican dominance and trifecta that they have in power in the state is certainly worrisome as we see things come out of the U.S. Supreme Court that are going to roll us back 50 years, right? Brown v. Board of Education is done, coming pretty soon. Roe v. Wade is done. And so we have our last stopgap, which is the state Supreme Court. And so it is very concerning about issues that are important to the vast majority of Ohioans, despite a conservative electorate.
Terry, each race was basically separated by, they were almost exact races, 54 to 46 or whatever it was, almost to the vote. So obviously people went in there, saw the R and clicked on it.
Well, I would also argue one of the big mistakes was Jennifer Brunner when she drove the decision about a year ago on bail bond that they couldn't consider public safety. So that statewide issue is on, that even Nan and Tim Ryan backed, but that issue gave a little more substance. And remember, Jennifer Brunner came into that race with an advantage because she'd been on the statewide ballot a number of times and had better name ID than Sharon Kennedy did. So I think the Democrats strategically made a big mistake on that decision on bail bond.
I would venture to guess that most people don't even know what they were voting for on issue 1 or issue 2. Issue 1 in particular, the nuances to that issue is we could spend an entire half hour at least on that alone, and that was what was holding up the lines at the voting places on Tuesday, was people trying to wade through those issues.
What happens on the court now, Andy?
We're going to see a challenge to the state's abortion ban. We're going to see redistricting come up again. There are going to be very big issues, and without that key swing vote of Maureen O'Connor, with Republicans having more of a traditional Republican majority, I think that we're going to see those decisions go in favor of what the Republicans want.
There's no chance that any Republican justice on that court might do what Maureen O'Connor did and swing back and forth a bit.
I think I do wonder sometimes if when you do take on the role as Chief Justice, you maybe reconsider what your position is on things and what role you play. But Kennedy, the Chief Justice Kennedy, has been very clear of what she believes on these issues like redistricting.
Okay. Our last topic, Democrats did have a few wins. They came on the edges, literally. The edges, or the corners of Ohio. In far southwest Ohio, Greg Landsman upset Republican incumbent Steve Chabot. In far northeast Ohio, Emilia Sykes beat Madison Gisato Gilbert. And in far northwest Ohio, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur won her Republican-leaning district now by beating Republican J.R. Majewski. Terry Casey, Republicans lost 2 seats in Congress thanks to Ohio. One we lost because of population changes, and they lost a seat.
Yes, and it kind of blows up the myth that the Republicans had the congressional districts rigged to yield a 13 to 2.
It's still only 5 out of 15. But
Well,
that's okay.
but considering the way the state went, that's actually pretty good. And I'd also give some credit to Donald Trump, because in both the Toledo-based district and the Akron-based district, he kind of picked and pushed candidates who really didn't have the muster and the ultimate ability to win. So part of that goes on Trump with those 2 bad candidates. And Chabot had been there a long time in Cincinnati, but it was time for change. But again, the whole redistricting myth is somewhat blown up because the result, instead of being 13-2, is 10-5.
It's not a myth.
No.
So the state votes 54% Republican, 46% Democratic. If they were drawing the maps the way the Constitution calls for them to draw the maps, it would be a split of 8 Republican seats, 7 Democratic seats. Instead, it's 10-5, and the Democrats just so happen to win those 2 toss-up districts, but Republicans still control 66% of the congressional delegation in
But doesn't
Ohio.
this, not to debate gerrymandering, which we have done forever, but these districts were competitive. And that's good, no, Ted?
And there were a lot of other. I mean, if you look at the competitive map, supposedly the state Senate should have been 18-15, but they ended up, the Democrats in the state Senate are down to only 7 members. So there were a number of districts that were competitive or lean Democrat that the Republicans still win. So candidates and campaigns do matter.
But they were only competitive for the Democratic districts. The Republican incumbents did not have to face too much
All
of
right,
a competition.
we'll put gerrymandering aside for a moment. Desiree, how do Democrats take these wins and build on them?
Yeah, so I mean, the maps are still gerrymandered. I have to say that. But I do think the campaigns that Amelia Sykes ran, her campaign, Greg, and Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, the saying all politics is local, held. And I think voters in these districts understood the importance of the power at the U.S. congressional level and holding the House in light of extremism. I think the takeaway, looking at the congressional districts in Ohio and what happened across the country, was that it was a referendum on extremism and that the American people actually want their lawmakers to work together, right? Like, that's the takeaway. And so hopefully we will continue to hold these districts, but we know how Republicans work here in this state, and so they'll likely look at the map and cut it apart again.
Terry, is that going to happen? They're going to look at these maps and say, you know, having a Republican +3 up where Marcy Kaptur is, that's not good enough. We need to go Republican +10.
Well, it depends on the district, because up there, you can't go into Lake Erie and count the walleye as part of the vote.
You can come down south a bit.
Well, but you come down south and you add more Republicans. So
I think that's their goal.
well,
no?
it might or might not happen because you really need to keep Toledo and a lot of Lucas County whole. So gerrymandering is a whole other topic, and it's not as easy to move the chess pieces around Ohio as what some people mysteriously think.
The economy was the #1 issue, but there are a lot of issues that were a fairly close second. I think the national results show that. Abortion being one, threats to democracy being another. We'll start with abortion. And how big a role do you think the Dobbs decision played here in Ohio?
I don't know. I mean, I would have to look closer at the number. I'm interested to see what the voting turnout was in the suburbs, particularly, and how they showed up at the polls. I think that's where you'd probably see the biggest difference. I think that's probably why Shabbat might have eroded his position down there, and likewise, it I think is another factor for the Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, who is also, by the way, the longest-serving female member of Congress in history, and so she's got some history behind her. I don't know. I mean, abortion, I think it's going to take a while for that to wind out or unwind that one. I don't think that the youth vote came out again. I think that if it had, there would have been more a larger midterm turnout, and I think that so for some reason they didn't show up.
Why do you think that is, Desiree?
We are still trying to figure that out. I could honestly say automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, we don't have that in Ohio. We're the only state in the Midwest that doesn't have one of the two, and other states do. Like Wisconsin, they saw youth voter turnout 360% higher, and we did not see that here in Ohio. I want to also say about the congressional races as we talk about what happened with the Senate race. Nancy Pelosi and the DCCC and HMP, they invested heavily in Ohio 9, Ohio 13, and Ohio 1, and that investment paid off. Now, what ads they ran, was it on abortion? We still have to go back through the data and see, but I'm curious to see that.
I agree with Ann that the young vote was not as big and significant as it could have been, like when Obama was running. And you can see in some suburban, better educated areas where the abortion issue was making a factor. But then you can also look at a lot of other counties, because on election night, I was looking at a lot of counties where J.D. Vance was rolling up 68 to 72%. And the governor, I think, had 5 counties where he got 87% of the vote in Ohio. So their abortion was a factor in some areas, but you really got to dig in within counties to see where it's at.
I think the abortion issue is going to be something that rolls out over time. It's not something that people are going to be knee-jerk about. They don't get it yet.
The big thing is, does a question get on the ballot soon? We saw the question in Kentucky. It wasn't a pure question, but it was a question supporting abortion rights, and the abortion rights side won. And same in Montana, same in California, Vermont, no surprise there, but also Michigan as well.
I think that's what's so interesting. We always talk about what one issue brings people out to vote for a specific candidate, and I think we're finding out that's not truly the case. But if you put the actual issue on the ballot, I think we might see a different outcome. So although Republicans swept Ohio this year, I think if you put the issue on the ballot, we might see a different result.
But the question is, who's going to draft that question and what's it going to say? Because the details, when you look at the polling, there's a lot of shades of gray there of what voters want or what they don't want on the abortion issue.
Be a lot of nuance. Anyway, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Desiree Timms, you're up first.
Yeah, I think we should be on the lookout for Republicans to make it very hard to get abortion on the ballot in this upcoming lame duck session or the next session. They're going to try to block progress any way that they can.
Terry.
We've got a lame duck legislative session coming up later in November or December. My prediction is it won't be as wild and crazy as what some doomsayers have predicted. There'll be a few things come out of there, but I don't think there's going to be anything that's going to upset people that much.
Ann Fisher.
The Ohio Republican Party chair, Bob Paduchik, is going to step down at the end of the year, I guess. And he says that the attempted coup last September was one of the lesser reasons, one of the lesser challenges. And I suppose time will tell as far as that goes.
And Andy.
The state legislative district maps were unconstitutional, but the election ran on them anyway. They were ruled unconstitutional partly because of how many Democratic districts were considered toss-up districts. This election, 12 of those 16 Democratic toss-up districts went to Republicans. They now have a 68-seat supermajority in the House.
All right, the pollsters, they're kind of right in Ohio this time. They weren't off by too much. They got the Senate race pretty close, and they've had DeWine winning in a blowout, which happened. So congratulations to the pollsters for getting Ohio relatively right this year. If you do not like the way these elections are going, maybe there's a different way. That will be the discussion of the next forum in our dialogue series we do in partnership with OSU's Glenn College of Public Affairs. We will rethink elections. We'll discuss alternate ways to pick our leaders, things like ranked choice voting, maybe reforming the Electoral College. It's Tuesday night at 6 at WOSU's headquarters on OSU's campus. We urge you to join us. Gene Krebs from Columbus on the Record will be there. Also, Catherine Terser and Jen Miller will be there as well. Check out our website, wosu.org/events for information on that. And check out wosu.org/coder to see each episode on demand on your time. For our crew, for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.